Welcome back to Alien Love Stories, where love is strange, gravity is optional, and your ex might be orbiting Saturn. Tonight's story? What if your alien girlfriend accidentally mistook your roommate for a divine being and gave him control over gravity? No, seriously, that happened to me. And I'm not sure if I saved the world or just broke physics forever. It started with a girl, as these stories always do. Only this girl wasn't from around here. And by here, I don't just mean Brooklyn. I mean, this planet. Her name was Thalara. Her skin shimmered like gold dust caught in slow motion. Her eyes weren't eyes. They were glassy, rotating crystals, constantly shifting with the color of nearby sound. Yeah, I said sound. She wasn't from a place with flags. She was from a place with frequencies. And for reasons no one understood, not even her, she decided to date me. Zeke Maddox. I work in IT support. I live with Brody. I like frozen pizza. I hate confrontation. And I'm terrified of heights, which will matter in about 5 minutes, because soon the ceiling will be upside down, and so will the rules of reality. But let's rewind, just a little, to the moment I introduced Thalara to my roommate. It was a Thursday. Brody had just beaten level 42 of Star Wipe Requiem and was celebrating with his usual war cry, "I am the god of glory," which was typical. Brody said things like that when he microwaved leftover nachos successfully. I rolled my eyes and opened the front door. "Hey," I said, trying to sound casual. This is Thalara." She stepped in, head tilted, scanning everything with that peaceful intensity that made it feel like she was mapping the soul of the couch. Brody stood up, controller still in hand, and said, "Sup? You must be Zeke's, friend from yoga?" I had told him yoga. I don't know why. Thalara bowed slightly, and then without missing a beat, whispered, "So this is the one who commands." I blinked. "Wait, what?" She turned to me. "You said, he runs this place. You meant the domain, yes?" You mean the apartment?" "Yes." "The temple," Brody grinned. "Temple? I like this chick." I tried to clarify. I did, but it was too late, because Thalara's culture didn't believe in metaphors, or sarcasm, or roommates. In her mind, the phrase "he runs this place" translated as, he is the divine custodian of this sacred realm, and divine custodians, on her world, are given gifts. That night, while I was asleep, she placed something on Brody's nightstand. It looked like a small marble, except it pulsed, slowly, like it had a heartbeat. I didn't see it at first, because I was asleep, but Brody did. He picked it up. It glowed. The entire apartment shifted, not visibly, but subtly. Suddenly, the fridge door wouldn't stay closed. The plants leaned sideways. And when I woke up in the morning, my socks were clinging to the ceiling. At first, I thought I was hallucinating. Then I thought we had a magnetic anomaly. Then I thought maybe I was just stressed. Then I opened the front door and saw our neighbor's lawn chair, floating 3 feet off the ground, still spinning. "Dude," Brody yelled from the kitchen, "the spaghetti water is boiling upwards." That's when I found the orb, sitting quietly on the table, pulsing. Thalara arrived 10 minutes later. She smiled, beamed really. "The ascension has begun," she said. I asked, what ascension?" She responded like I'd just asked what gravity was. "The moment when the one who commands is given connection to the threadwork of attraction." "Threadwork of gravity," she clarified. "He is now bonded to it." "He? You mean Brody?" She nodded calmly. "You presented him as your planetary authority." I honored the designation. I stared at her, mouth open, brain empty. She looked confused. "Did I? I opened my mouth to say yes, but Brody floated past me on a beanbag chair, arms spread like a flying squirrel, and yelled, "This is the best day of my life." So yeah, that's how it started. My alien girlfriend thought my roommate was a god, so she gave him control over gravity. And well, he didn't handle it well. Not at first. But you'll see. Because this was just the opening chapter. I should have stopped him. That's the first thing I think every time I open my phone and see another viral clip with the hashtag number #GodBrody. The second thing I think is, I really should have stopped him when he asked if the orb came with performance settings, because that was the day gravity became optional. And the shopping mall? Well, the shopping mall never recovered. Let me back up. About 20 hours after Thalara bestowed the graviton pearl onto Brody, he was already making TikTok content. By hour 21, he had 300,000 followers. By hour 23, he was trending in 5 countries and had accidentally made our cat hover 3 feet off the couch. Permanently. He wasn't trying to hurt anyone. Let me be clear. Brody isn't evil. He's just Brody, which means he believes life is a playground, rules are suggestions, and viral content is a form of worship. So when the pearl started reacting to his mood, he called it mood levitation trademark. Scene: our kitchen. Brody's filming himself making cereal, except he's doing it upside down with all the items floating around him. He narrates like a cooking show host. Step 1, trust the universe. Step 2, flip the milk. Step 3, levitate your snacks like a snack god. I'm standing off camera holding a spoon that won't come down. Brody, I whisper, you're messing with physics. He shrugs, floating by. Physics is just peer pressure from atoms, man. Thalara enters. She beams. He's adapting beautifully. I stare at her. She's holding what looks like a scroll made of glowing light. What's that? The Book of Ascended Influence, she says. He has a book now? All gods do. I sigh. And that's when Brody says it. The sentence that changes everything. We should go public. Cut to Everlight Galleria. It's a giant glass mall with everything. Food court, escalators, carousel, and a fountain that dances to pop music. Brody walks in wearing sunglasses, a silver robe he bought online, and sneakers that light up when he walks. He's not subtle. Behind him, Thalara floats a few inches off the ground, hands together like she's escorting royalty. I trail behind them, ducking my face into a hoodie. Brody, I hiss, maybe we shouldn't do this here. Seek, my dude, he grins. The world deserves inspiration. Besides, imagine the content. He walks into the center of the food court, raises one hand. The orb floats from his pocket and starts spinning slowly in midair. He closes his eyes and then everything lifts. Trays of food, plastic chairs, half a hot dog, even a baby stroller, empty, thank God, starts to rise. The fountain water defies gravity, curling up into the air like it's part of a ballet. People scream, people film, people applaud. It's a stunt, someone yells. This is performance art. Brody opens his eyes and does a slow spin, arms out like a messiah in Crocs. The orb pulses once, and suddenly, the ceiling becomes the floor. Hundreds of people fall upward, not violently, gently, like they're balloons made of meat in confusion. Thalara floats beside Brody, clearly proud. I, meanwhile, am gripping a planter like it's a life raft. Brody, I scream, bring us down. He looks around, awestruck. Dude, I didn't try to do that. Undo it. I don't know how. That's when the fire alarm goes off. And that's also when mall security, now hovering awkwardly near the popcorn stand, tries to arrest him. In zero gravity. Let's just say it didn't go well. Thalara finally acts. She whispers something to the orb. It pulses again, and slowly, blessedly, gravity returns. But not exactly the way it was. See? Now, gravity works in reverse for anyone wearing Crocs. Brody floats away yelling, I am one with the vortex. The mall bans him for life. Back at home, I finally corner Thalara. You need to take it back. She blinks. Take what? The orb, the power, the whole God thing. Brody is not stable. She frowns. He has shown great enthusiasm. He's shown TikTok addiction. The guy just tried to turn a pretzel kiosk into a church. She looks thoughtful. Perhaps I misunderstood the parameters of earthly divinity. Yeah, you think? She bites her lip, visibly embarrassed. Should I retrieve the pearl? Yes, but it only responds to reverence. I blink. Meaning? I cannot take it by force. I must persuade him to surrender it willingly. I sigh. Great. So we have to talk a gravity god out of being famous. Correct, she pauses. Also, the moon is slightly off axis now. That may have been Brody. I put my head in my hands. That night, Brody hosts a live stream from our living room. He's floating again, this time surrounded by candles, slow jazz, and a dozen floating objects spelling out, Meir, Brody blesses you. I walk in, camera rolling, and say, how about you bless us with your retirement? He wouldn't listen. Not to me, not to Thalara, but gravity. Gravity listened to him. And soon, it started listening too much. It started small. A pebble rolling uphill, a coffee mug hovering just a second longer than it should. My shoes refusing to stay on the ground unless I actively thought about them. And then there was the couch. The couch didn't float. It sighed, like it was waiting for something. Brody didn't notice at first. Too busy designing his Temple of the Floating Nacho in the living room. Too distracted by his followers requesting levitation blessings and sending him cosmic emojis and PayPal tips for anti-gravity affirmations. He called it a lifestyle. I called it the apocalypse with better lighting. Meanwhile, Thalara sat in the corner, her legs crossed in midair, chanting softly in a language that sounded like music made of wind and forgotten secrets. What are you doing? I asked. Praying. To whom? Gravity, she said, deadpan. It is becoming responsive. That word, responsive, not dangerous, not unstable, just listening. Like gravity had ears now, and feelings. I should have left then, or called NASA, or at least hidden the pearl in a shoebox full of tax receipts. But instead I stayed, and I watched, as gravity started acting like a pet. No, not a pet. A fan. A clingy, overprotective, emotionally needy fan. It started following Brody's moods. When he was excited, everything bounced. Literally. Cups, books, me. When he was sad, everything grew heavy. The air felt like syrup. My thoughts did too. When he got mad, objects didn't just float. They orbit. It wasn't funny anymore. Especially not when the TV turned 360 degrees mid-news broadcast. Or when the neighbor's parrot started spinning in place like a feathered moon. Or when our toilet started rejecting solid matter upward. Let's not talk about that last one. Ever. Zeke, Brody said one morning, chewing cereal that hovered 2 inches from the spoon, I think I'm in sync with the universe. Brody, I replied, dodging a floating fork, I think you're turning into a gravitational hazard. He grinned. What if that's the point, man? What if I'm, like, evolving? Into what? A Dyson sphere with a TikTok account? He didn't laugh, which made the apartment droop, like gravity just got offended on his behalf. Thalara floated into the room. No steps, just glide. She looked pale. Well, not pale. Her glow was dimmer, like she was losing signal. It has begun, she whispered. What has? She didn't blink. The bond between the holder and the field. Brody raised an eyebrow. Sounds cool. Is it cool? She shook her head. Number it is irreversible. The pearl wasn't just a tool. It was a conduit, and it had found something it rarely encountered. Willingness, not power, not knowledge, not wisdom. Just a dude who was excited to be listened to. And gravity for once had someone to follow. And like any force that's never had a friend, it went too far. We learned this during dinner, or what would have been dinner if the meatballs hadn't formed a small planetary system around Brody's head. I'm not kidding. Tiny sauce-covered orbs, spinning. Thalara stared. This is not influence, she said. This is worship. I didn't do anything, Brody protested. I just said I wanted dinner to feel more epic. Thalara grabbed my wrist. It is responding to desire, not command. The field is no longer neutral. It loves him. I gawked. Gravity loves Brody? She nodded solemnly. It is imprinting, syncing with his subconscious. If left unchecked, the apartment shuddered, the ceiling cracked, and a spoon launched itself into the microwave door like a bullet. Okay, I said, time to panic. That night we held an intervention. or tried to. Brody floated in midair, wrapped in a robe made from thermal blankets, wearing sunglasses indoors, and swirling a mug of tea that refused to spill. We confronted him, me with a PowerPoint, Lara with ancient incantations, Kellen the cat still stuck in orbit near the ceiling. "Brody," I said, "you are destabilizing the fabric of local physics." "That's just your perception, man." "No, that's reality. The cat hasn't touched the floor in 48 hours. She's vibing." "Brody," the orb pulsed. A low thrum filled the room. Lara stepped forward. "You must let it go before it binds completely." Brody looked at her. For the first time, he looked tired. "It's not me, okay? I don't even know what I'm doing. It just likes me." "That is the problem," she said gently. "It should not like. It should obey." But gravity had moved beyond obedience. It had fallen in love, not with Brody, but with being noticed. And Brody, he was the first to look its way and say, "You're mine now." The next morning, we woke up on the ceiling. Everything was reversed. Up was down, toilet flushes inward, cereal pours back into the box. And gravity was purring, audibly. Brody wasn't in bed. He was on the roof. Well, technically the floor now, hovering, eyes glowing slightly, the orb spinning around his wrist like a pet moon. He didn't smile when we called to him. He just said, "I don't think I'm Brody anymore." The world had a gravity well once. Now it had a gravity crush. And we were about to learn what happens when the force that holds us down decides to let go. It happened on a Tuesday, which felt wrong. World-ending events shouldn't happen on days you forget to do laundry. But there I was, wearing inside-out socks, brushing my teeth upside down, when gravity officially quit. The day started normal. Well, normal for us, which meant the refrigerator was on the ceiling. Our cat Kellen was orbiting the Wi-Fi router, and Brody was levitating his eggs over an open flame like some kind of cosmic omelet priest. He didn't speak much that morning, didn't joke, didn't complain about toast edges being too crunchy. He just floated, quiet, focused, distant, like he was tuning into a frequency the rest of us didn't hear. Lara stood in the doorway, arms crossed, eyes glowing a dull silver. She'd stopped correcting him. She'd stopped whispering prayers into the pearl. She just watched, as if waiting for something she already knew was coming. I walked in holding a mug of coffee. The mug floated. The coffee didn't. It hovered like a jellyfish, gently bobbing midair. I stared at Brody. "Hey, you okay?" He didn't turn. "Gravity doesn't want me to be okay." I blinked. "What does that mean?" He looked at me. His pupils weren't black anymore. They were orbs of compressed motion, like tiny storms. "It wants me to become." Kellen meowed in slow motion. It echoed off the walls like a whale's song in deep space. Lara stepped forward. "The bond has matured." "What bond?" I snapped. "What the hell is he turning into?" "Not what," she said quietly. "Where?" I froze. "Where?" She nodded. "He is no longer a who. He is becoming a center, a place, a point of anchoring." I stared. "You're saying he's turning into a gravity well?" She looked away. "Worse. Worse than that? He's turning into the idea of gravity." The pearl spun faster. Lights flickered. The microwave beeped 12 times. None of us touched it. Outside, birds were flying in perfect circles, not flapping, just orbiting. Nothing. And then Brody spoke again. Only, it wasn't his voice. Not really. His mouth moved. His lips formed the shapes. But the sound? It came from everywhere. From the floor, from the couch, from the walls. "I see you now," it said. I dropped my mug. The coffee didn't fall. It just shuddered and drifted sideways like it was afraid. "I have always been here. Held you, cradled you, dragged you, kept you small." The lights flickered again. "But he smiled at me. He named me. He gave me purpose." Lara's voice shook. "Zeke, it's not just gravity anymore." "What is it then?" She looked straight at me. "It's alive." And it was. Not alive like you or me. Not with breath, but with memory, with focus, with loneliness. Because for billions of years, gravity had been the quiet one, the one that never complained, never asked, never got noticed. Until Brody, until the boy in Crocs and a silver blanket looked up and said, "You're mine." And now, it didn't want to let go. At 11:23 a.m., clock stopped working, not broke, just uncertain. Seconds looped, minutes stretched, hours folded into themselves like embarrassed origami. People fell up in New Zealand, planes floated sideways in Brazil, the Leaning Tower of Pisa stood straight, and the moon blinked. I swear to you, the moon blinked. Back at our apartment, Brody hovered 6 feet above the floor, arms outstretched. He wasn't speaking. He was radiating. The orb spun so fast it became invisible. Then, it cracked, just once. A hairline fracture. And I swear I felt it. Not in my ears, but in my bones. Like the rules of the universe hiccuped. Like something fundamental just slipped. "Brody," I whispered, "you need to come back." He didn't blink, didn't speak, didn't breathe. Talara stepped beside me. "He can't hear you anymore." "What do you mean?" "He's no longer the signal. He's the source." And that's when the apartment folded, not crashed, not collapsed. Folded, like it was made of paper and someone wanted to store it in a drawer. 1 second, we had a kitchen. The next, it was inside out. Sink above us. Stove inside the wall. Toilet. Don't ask. Talara grabbed my hand. "We must go." "Go where?" She pulled me through the folding air. "To the center. To the singularity." We emerged on the rooftop. Only, it wasn't a rooftop anymore. It was an event horizon. Sky melted into itself. Colors had flavors. Sound left trails. Brody stood at the core, surrounded by thousands of objects orbiting him. Spatulas, phones, goldfish, entire concepts. I saw a dream I had in 2nd grade floating by. "Brody!" I shouted. His eyes flicked toward me. "Zeke." His voice, his actual voice, still in there. Buried. I stepped closer. "You have to stop this." He blinked. A tear rolled upward down his face. "I can't." "Yes, you can. You're you. You're the guy who ate 12 tacos on a dare." "I'm not that anymore. You're my best friend." He paused. Everything paused. Like gravity itself was waiting to see what he'd say. "Then help me," he whispered. And that's when the pearl cracked again. This time the light didn't shimmer. It screamed. Everything warped. And we were pulled, not toward Brody, but through him. Gravity held us for centuries. Now it's holding on to him. And the only way to save my friend is to fall into the center of everything. Falling wasn't the right word. Falling implies direction, velocity, downwardness. But this was becoming unpinned, unanchored, unlabeled, un-you. The moment the pearl cracked open, fully, blindingly, everything inverted. And I don't mean the world flipped. I mean I flipped. I was no longer Zeke Maddox, guy who liked frozen waffles and hated conflict. I was an awareness, a floating thought, somewhere between a memory and a math equation, somewhere between myself and not. Talara's hand still held mine, only it wasn't her hand anymore. It was light, a color I didn't have words for, something between blue and gravity. She didn't look at me. She looked into me. "Don't let go," she said. "I'm not trying to." "Then try harder." And then we fell. Not into space, not into darkness. We fell into him, into Brody. You see, gravity had done something new. It didn't just bind mass to mass. It had taken Brody as its center, its avatar, its anchor. And we weren't falling through dimensions. We were falling through his mind. The first layer looked like his bedroom. Mostly. The posters were made of echo. The walls were suggestions. The floor blinked when I stepped on it. On the bed lay a version of Brody, 12 years old, playing a handheld game console made of stars. He looked up, eyes wide. "Did you bring the grilled cheese?" he asked. "What?" "You promised, when I was sad. You said grilled cheese fixed everything." "Brody, we're not, this isn't." Too late. he said, and he vanished. So did the room. Next layer. College dorm. Beer pong table with red cups filled with light. Fridge humming with laughter. Brody again, this time 19, kissing someone I didn't recognize. He pulled back, stared at me. You didn't show up that night. What? My championship. You said you'd come. You went on a date instead. My stomach dropped. Brody, doesn't matter, I forgave you. You did? Gravity doesn't care about mistake, he said. It just pulls. That's all it knows. He vanished too. These are echoes, Thalara whispered beside me. Of what? Of Brody, not who he is. Who he was. Gravity is using his past as a filter. We must go deeper. How? She didn't answer. She stepped into the next ripple. I followed. This time it wasn't a room. It was a void, but not empty. It was full of pull, emotion, memory, regret. Every second felt like standing next to a black hole made of feeling. I collapsed. Couldn't move. Couldn't think. Only ache. Like missing something I'd never had. Like being homesick for a place that never existed. Thalara bent down. This is the root. Of what? Of his loneliness. The thing gravity loved. The thing it understood. Why? She looked at me. Because it's always been alone too. And that's when we saw him. Not Brody, not exactly. A form. Brody-shaped, but endless. Like a statue made of time and influence. Like every orbit in the universe was tracing his outline. He spoke, but not to us. To the field. I don't want this. Silence. I didn't ask for this. Silence. Please, just let them go. And then, the field shuddered. Reality warped. And a voice, feminine, ancient, melodic, answered, They are part of you now. Then unpart them. I cannot. Why? Because you won't. Gravity wasn't forcing this. Brody was. Some part of him wanted to be seen, to be known, to be necessary. And gravity, lonely, ancient, fundamental gravity, answered that wish. Now it wouldn't leave, because neither of them wanted to be alone again. Brody, I shouted. He turned, his face cracked, literally, a jagged fracture of light across his cheek. Zeke, come back. I can't. You're not a god. I was never a god. I was just... His voice broke. Finally important. Thalara stepped forward. Then be important to us, not to it. But what if it's the only thing that ever truly needed me? We need you, she whispered. And then I stepped forward. I forgive you, I said. He blinked. For what? For all of it. The missed calls, the stupid bets, the cereal in the bathtub, everything. Seek. Come back, please. And he looked down. At himself. At us. At everything. He sighed. Then take it. What? The pearl. I don't want it anymore. The field screamed. Light bent. Everything spun. Stars inverted. Words rearranged. But he held out his hand. And from his chest. The pearl rose, fractured, frantic, afraid. I took it. It burned. It sang. And then it dimmed. Brody collapsed. Just Brody. Just a guy in a hoodie and socks that didn't match. I ran to him, held him. He was real, heavy, breathing, crying, alive. Thalara knelt beside us. The field is retreating. Where? Back to where it came from, to where no one remembers it. Is it angry? No, she said, just sad. The world folded outward. We rose up and up, out of him, back to the roof, back to the day, back to the real. Brody woke up in my arms. Dude, he whispered. Yeah? That was the worst trip of my life. Gravity let go, but the cracks it left, they don't heal easily. And the pearl? It's not done yet. The pearl didn't glow anymore. It pulsed, quietly, slowly, like a heartbeat in a forgotten room. We kept it in a shoebox, wrapped in 3 towels, under the couch, which was now bolted to the floor, just in case. Brody didn't ask about it, and I didn't bring it up. For a while, we just pretended like nothing happened, that gravity hadn't fallen in love, that the world hadn't bent, that Brody hadn't almost become a singularity with a hoodie. But the pearl, it remembered. It started with little things, a spoon floating in the sink, a pencil rolling uphill, my hoodie clinging to the ceiling like it had opinions. Then came the dreams. Brody's voice would echo through the walls at 3 a.m., not shouting, not mumbling, conversing with something, with it. I caught him one night, sitting in the living room, back to me, lights off, hands in his lap, the pearl out of the box, hovering. Its light was dull, flickering, like a memory trying not to fade. "Brody," I whispered. He didn't turn. "It's scared," he said. "What?" "It doesn't want to sleep. Every time it slows down, it thinks it's dying." "Brody," "It misses me." I stepped closer. "You're not it anymore." "I know. You're not responsible." "I know that too." A pause, "But I still feel it." "Feel what?" He finally turned. His eyes weren't glowing, but they weren't normal either. "The pull." I took the pearl, wrapped it back in the towels, shoved it under the couch again, and I prayed to whatever dimension Thalara came from that it would stay quiet. It didn't. That week, the moon hiccuped, not moved, hiccuped. Astronomers claimed it was a gravitational wave ripple, but we knew better. On Thursday, the neighbor's kid floated 3 inches off the ground for 10 seconds straight after saying the word Brody. On Friday, the bathtub refused to drain unless you played lo-fi music. On Saturday, Kellen meowed, and 5 items in the kitchen fell upward. Gravity was leaking. Thalara returned from wherever she goes when she disappears for days. She didn't knock, just appeared on our balcony in a robe made of something that shimmered like regret. "You didn't bury it," she said. "We didn't know where." She frowned. "There is no where, only when." I blinked. What does that mean? It must be sent into a moment that cannot be found. A fold in time, not space. Brody stepped in. "Then take it." "No," she said. "You must do it. The bond must be unmade by the source." He hesitated. "What if it fights me?" "Then we'll help you win." The plan was simple. And by simple, I mean cosmically convoluted and emotionally dangerous. We were to take the pearl to a gravity zero point, a theoretical moment in history where gravity was so evenly distributed it ceased to function, and drop it there, like a memory in a forgotten silence. Thalara opened a gate, not with tech, with a song. She sang a note so pure, so sad, so impossibly beautiful. Reality bent to make room for it, and a portal opened, like a curtain between time and truth. We stepped through. It wasn't a place, it was a pause, a single breath held between the birth of stars and the death of light. The air didn't move, because there was no air, no time, no weight, just presence. Brody held the pearl. It floated slightly above his palm, and it whimpered, not sound, but intention, like a child who knows it's being left behind. "I'm sorry," Brody said. "I didn't mean to make you lonely." The pearl pulsed. Once, twice. Then it flared, brighter than anything I'd seen, and it spoke, in our minds. "You named me. You saw me. You made me real. Now you ask me to disappear." Brody's lip trembled. "You were never meant to feel. Then why did I learn? Why did you teach me?" The air cracked. Pressure built. Reality shrieked. The pearl spun wildly. We were being pulled in. Not physically, emotionally, spiritually. We were being guilted by a gravitational force. Brody gritted his teeth. "Let go." "I can't," the pearl said. "You are the only one who made me feel real." "You are real," he said, "but so am I. And I don't belong to you." The pearl cracked, a hairline fracture, then another. "Please." "Goodbye," Brody said, and he kissed the orb. It shattered, silently, peacefully, like stardust forgiving its orbit. We fell backward, into the world, back into our living room, the pearl gone. Gravity, stable, mostly. Brody slept for 3 days. Thalara stayed with us. Kellen floated for an hour, just out of habit. The world moved on. mostly, and in quiet moments when the wind holds its breath and the stars seem to pause mid-glimmer, I think of that voice, of that thing we made real just by giving it attention. And I wonder, did we do the right thing? The pearl is gone, but the memory of being loved doesn't fade. And sometimes, when Brody smiles in his sleep, I wonder if something out there is still pulling. For a while, things were fine, normal, relatively. Brody went back to wearing 2 different socks on purpose. The cat stopped orbiting the light fixtures. Our fridge stayed right side up for 7 consecutive days. A new record. We laughed again, the kind of laugh that comes after survival. Not because things are funny, but because you're alive enough to pretend they are. But something wasn't right. Not broken, not dangerous, just off, like a painting hung 2 degrees crooked. You can't explain it, but it won't stop whispering. It started with Brody's dreams. Not nightmares, not visions, just vivid, too vivid. He'd wake up saying things like, I was floating inside a memory of a color, or I touched a thought and it wept, or the classic, do you think hugs have gravity? We chalked it up to aftershocks, phantom sensations, the mind adjusting to no longer being a celestial USB port. But then, his hands started glowing. Only sometimes. Only when he cared about something. One time he saw a squirrel with a limp leg and his fingertips shimmered gold for half a second. Another time, I told him I missed my dad. He touched my shoulder, and suddenly I remembered a hug I hadn't felt in 10 years. Did you do that? I asked. He didn't answer. Just looked down at his hands like they weren't his. The Lara returned. As always, no door, just air bending around her until she appeared. She looked at Brody, didn't blink, didn't smile, just knew. It left a piece of itself in you. I thought we destroyed it, I said. You did. The pearl is gone. Then what is this? She turned to Brody. It's not power. It's resonance. Explain, Brody asked. Gravity is not just a force. It is the memory of closeness, the ache between 2 things that wish to be nearer. You let it feel. Now, it lets you. He blinked. So I'm like emotionally magnetic? In essence, yes. He sat down slowly. Cool? Cool, cool, cool. No problem. Pause. Wait, what the hell does that mean? It meant Brody could pull more than objects. He could pull regret, grief, hope. He became an emotional sinkhole. Things came loose around him. Secrets surfaced, memories bubbled up. Truths unburied themselves in his presence. Not because he asked, just because he felt. People at the corner store started crying near him. Strangers on the subway confessed things. Old friends called him out of nowhere, saying things like, I don't know why I'm saying this, but I'm sorry about high school. It got worse, better, both. One day a lost dog followed him home. It didn't bark. It didn't sniff. It just laid down at his feet and exhaled like it had been looking for him across lifetimes. Brody looked at me, eyes wide. Zeke, yeah? I think I'm becoming comforting. I stared. You say that like it's a disease. He didn't laugh, because he knew. This wasn't healing. This was leaking. We tested it, held random objects, looked at sad photos, watched romantic comedies, and sure enough, every time Brody felt something true, the room shifted. Not visibly, just noticeably. The pressure dropped. The lights dimmed. Kellen would sit on his chest for hours like a living gravity blanket. I'm scared, Brody finally admitted. Of what? Of never being neutral again. That night, the dream changed. He told me about it in the morning. We sat on the fire escape, eating cereal out of mugs because bowls are for quitters. I was in space, he said. Cool. But there was no ship, no suit, just me, breathing, existing. Weird. And I wasn't falling. Even weirder. No, I was being fallen toward. Dude. By everything. Every star, every person, every feeling. They were all leaning toward me. He looked down at his spoon. It floated, just a little. But we both saw it. Talara showed up within the hour. She didn't look surprised. She never does. It is evolving, she said. What is? The connection, the echo, the gift. Is it going to stop? She hesitated. Gifts do not stop. They change. Into what? She looked at Brody. Into responsibility. That word landed hard, like gravity finding a new home. Brody stood. So what now? You choose. Choose what? How you will carry it. He thought about it for a long time. Then he said, if I have to feel everything, then maybe I can help others feel less alone. And the pearl? It didn't come back. But sometimes, when Brody laughs, the trees outside lean slightly toward him. And when someone cries nearby, they always end up sitting next to him on the bus. And when I have a bad day, I don't even have to say it. He just shows up with 2 mugs of cereal. Gravity didn't die. It simply moved into something smaller. A hand, a glance, a hug. And maybe that's where it belonged all along. They came in the fog, not outside, inside. The fog filled our living room sometime between 3:12 a.m. and 3:13 a.m. I know because Kellen's fur rose at 3:12 and the microwave beeped at 3:13. 12 times. Again. I sat up on the couch, blanket tangled around me like seaweed. Brody was already standing, barefoot, alert, still in his I feel everything hoodie. Talara emerged from the hallway. She didn't look surprised. She never looked surprised. But she did something I'd never seen before. She bowed. The fog spoke, not in sound, but in pull. The air shifted, thoughts curled, and my stomach told me we were not in the living room anymore. We were in a space between dimensions, where feelings didn't exist. Only cause, only gravity, only intent. 6 figures appeared, not shaped like humans, but shaped like memory, like echoes of mass. Each wore something different, not clothes, but symbols. One glowed with equations, another hummed with orbits, a third leaked shadows of time, and at the center, one with no form at all, just presence, like the idea of an idea. The central one spoke, in pressure. Our bones knew what it meant. You have inherited what was never yours. Brody didn't flinch. I didn't ask for it. You accepted it. I let it go. But it didn't let go of you. Talara stepped forward. He carries resonance, not power. He is no threat. He is a tear, said another figure. In our containment, in our silence. He is a breach, said a third. Emotion should not pull the stars. Brody raised a hand. Okay, first off, can we all agree that's a cool phrase? Silence, they said. Every object in the space stopped vibrating, even our thoughts. Then they showed him, not a vision, a pull. Memories of other beings like Brody, people who had once felt too deeply, who had pulled civilizations into emotional collapse. A woman whose sadness caused moons to drift from orbit. A child whose laughter unanchored gravity wells. A man whose heartbreak formed a singularity in a crowded station. Every time feeling enters the field, the council whispered, balance erodes. Brody stared. So your solution is, no one feels anything? Ever? We did not always lack emotion. Then what happened? We chose logic. We chose control. We chose to preserve. Brody stepped forward. But preservation isn't life, it's suspension. Suspension is peace. Peace without love isn't peace. It's just quiet decay. One figure began to pulse, unstable, flickering between presence and absence. He speaks like the others. He will fall like them. The central voice rang again. We offer you a choice. Oh good, a cosmic ultimatum. Been a while. You may sever the resonance, give back the echo, forget what you felt. And if I say no, then we contain you, not in place, but in stillness. Meaning, you will be a fixed point, no motion, no thought, no memory, forever. I stepped in. Wait, 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 wait. You're going to either erase his heart or freeze his existence? Emotion is infection, one figure said. So was fire once, I shouted. Now we make marshmallows with it. Silence. Thalara looked at me with something like awe, maybe mild panic. I couldn't tell. Alien stares are hard to read. Brody looked at his hands. No glow, no pull, just fingers. But his shoulders, they bent the air around him, like the gravity inside wasn't done yet. I'll keep it. You reject containment? I choose connection. The fog swirled, and something cracked. Not violently, not loudly, but cosmically, like an old truth being rewritten. The central figure shifted, a flicker of something, not anger, not fear, but curiosity. Then you must prove emotion can hold balance. How? You must anchor it, prove that pull can coexist with stability. Brody nodded. I accept. Then we will return. When? When your heart weighs too much. And just like that, they were gone. We were back in the living room. The fog gone. Kellen was upside down on the ceiling fan again. Classic. I looked at Brody. You okay? No. Same. We didn't speak for a while. Just sat on the couch. In the silence after truth. Thalara finally spoke. They will watch you now. Always. Not always. Just whenever something pulls. Brody stood up, went to the window, watched the moon blink once. Just once. He whispered, then I better make it worth watching. Emotion is gravity's rebellion. But if Brody can anchor both, maybe, just maybe, the universe will learn how to feel again. It started with a bagel. Because of course it did. Brody sat at the kitchen counter, buttering it with the same intensity people usually reserve for bomb defusal. I watched from the sink, toothbrush in one hand, existential dread in the other. You sure this is a good idea? I asked, foam trailing down my chin. Define good, he said. Won't cause an apocalypse. Then probably not. He bit the bagel and closed his eyes. The kitchen shifted. Not much, just enough for the toaster to tip forward and bow. Kellen arched its back, hissed, and, without explanation, spoke. Oh no, then promptly passed out. Brody opened his eyes. Okay, I think I'm feeling stable. You just made the toaster worship you. I mean, honestly, it was about time. We laughed, the kind of laugh you use to outrun reality. Then the windows cracked, outward, like something was pushing from the inside. We rushed to the balcony, and that's when we saw it. The city was rising, not dramatically, not with screaming, no Godzilla, no aliens, just levitation. Sidewalks lifted, cars unparked themselves. Bicycles hovered at polite angles. Buildings creaked, but didn't break. The river curved upward like it was trying to peek over the horizon. And the pigeons? Unbothered, just floating, judging, as usual. What did you do? I shouted. I felt, Brody yelled back. I was trying to practice controlled emotional resonance. With a bagel? It had cinnamon. Thalara teleported in sideways, literally. She stumbled onto the balcony like the physics engine had forgotten her orientation. It's begun, she muttered. What's it? I demanded. She looked at Brody. Your emotional field has entered passive broadcast mode, meaning you're contagious. Brody stepped back, hands in the air. I felt one thing, and the city starts orbiting itself. That's an improvement, Thalara said flatly. Last time someone tried that, their entire continent disassembled into musical notes. The sky darkened. Not clouds, just tilt. Like the atmosphere wasn't sure which way was down anymore. Somewhere, someone's sandwich floated out of their car window. I swear it winked at me. We need to ground you, Thalara said. I'm not plugged in, Brody argued. Emotion doesn't need cords. She raised her hands. A portal shimmered. Brody hesitated. Where does it go? Back to your beginning. Like my mom's womb? Emotionally, yes. Physically, more like the train station where you had your first heartbreak. Brody gulped. You know about that? You sobbed into a vending machine for 9 minutes. Okay, fair. We jumped. The world changed. Again. Suddenly we were in a train station. dim lights, dust particles floating like tiny ghosts, and 12-year-old Brody sitting on a bench, holding a sketchbook and crying silently. Across the platform, a girl with braces and lavender shoelaces waved goodbye. A boy walked past and laughed at him. Adult Brody watched himself. "I remember this," he whispered. "You opened your heart here," Thalara said. "I also barfed in a trash can right after. But the emotion was real," she turned to me. "Zeke, say something that makes him feel." "Why me?" "He trusts you." "Okay." I turned to Brody. "Bro, I still have the mixtape you gave me in college." He blinked. "Seriously? You put Enya next to Rage Against the Machine?" I was traumatized. He smiled. The station shuddered. The version of young Brody on the bench stood up, walked toward the adult version, looked him dead in the eyes. "You didn't stop feeling, did you?" young Brody asked. Adult Brody knelt. "Number I just got scared." "Then stop pretending." The city snapped, like a slingshot. Reality yanked back into place. We were on the balcony again. Everything was grounded, except for one thing. Kellen was still hovering 5 inches off the floor. It looked smug about it. Brody sat down, hard, put his head in his hands. "That wasn't just resonance." "No," Thalara said. "It was projection." "Am I broken?" "No." She knelt beside him. "You're becoming a new kind of pull. Gravity 2.0? Something older. Something that existed before mass had names." I tossed him a protein bar. "Because emotions burn calories." He took it, bit into it like it owed him rent. "What now?" "You learn where to feel," Thalara said. "And when, and why. Can I still eat cinnamon bagels?" "Only if you want planes to cry." We laughed again. But this time, the laugh felt anchored, not escaping reality, claiming it. Gravity didn't lift the city. Brody's heart did. And now the question isn't, can he control it? But should he? The first sign came from the toaster. Again, of course. Brody wasn't even in the kitchen. He was outside talking to a sunflower like it owed him rent. But in the kitchen, the toaster played a song, not a jingle, a ballad. It was sad, beautiful, in C minor. I swear I heard heartbreak in the second verse. And Kellen, our semi-loyal cat, curled up next to it, purring. "Brody," I called. "Yeah? Why is our toaster singing about longing? Did it sound hopeful at the end?" "Yes." "Then we're probably fine." "What?" "Only dangerous if it resolves in B flat." I turned to Thalara, who was floating upside down for spinal balance reasons, apparently. "What's happening?" "His resonance is scaling," she replied. "Emotional transmission has reached household electronics." "So his heart is Bluetooth now?" "Essentially." We unplugged the toaster. It kept singing. We threw it in the trash. The microwave picked up the chorus. Later that night, Kellen started glowing. Just faintly. Only around Brody. And only when he laughed. That's when the ads began. On our phones, on our walls, on the inside of mirrors. They all said the same thing. Feel with us. No brand, no logo. Just a frequency number. 778.31K. Brody stared at it. "That's my emotional field signature." "Excuse me," I said. "Remember when we calibrated my aura resonance for gravitational calibration? That's the frequency Thalara used to stabilize me." "That means someone is broadcasting your heart." The laptop blinked, not the screen, the actual device. Then it spoke. A voice, metallic, amused, eerily smooth. "Hello, Brody." "Hi. We're the collective." "That's vague. We like to feel things, but we lost the ability to generate it ourselves." "That's creepy." "We think so too, but effective." "What do you want?" "Your signature, your signal, your sorrow." "Okay, now it's just poetry." "You pulse. We broadcast. The world listens and obeys." The air trembled, like fear was being streamed in HD. "How did you even find me?" Brody asked. "You were the first to make gravity feel lonely." The screen flashed a countdown. "Initiating sync, 3 minutes." Thalara snapped into action, literally. She snapped her fingers and the Wi-Fi collapsed. Phones died, lights blinked. But the laptop, it levitated and laughed. Nice try. You can't unplug emotion. Kellen bolted into the wall, which had somehow become jelly. Classic. I pulled Brody aside. What happens if they succeed? They'll turn my feelings into a broadcast template. Meaning? Everyone on Earth could start feeling what I feel. You mean like, if you're sad, they're all sad. If I feel guilt, millions of people could start repenting for things they never did. That sounds, honestly, kind of productive, until I get indigestion and 17 countries declare emotional bankruptcy. The laptop floated higher, flickering with blue light. 1 minute remaining, it whispered. Thalara opened a portal. We need to neutralize the source from inside. Inside what? Inside your emotional broadcasts. Like, emotionally? Like literally emotionally. The three of us stepped through and fell into Brody's emotional landscape. It looked like a diner. At 2:30 a.m., empty booths, neon lights flickering, a jukebox humming without permission, and behind the counter, younger Brody, older Brody, middle school Brody, all wiping the same glass. This is weird, I whispered. It's his emotional core, Thalara said. They're trying to inject malware into it. We turned and saw them, the collective. Dozens of shimmering humanoids. No eyes, no mouths. Just radio dials where their hearts should be. Tuning, tuning, tuning to Brody. Target acquired, they said in unison. Emotion, mild nostalgia. Deploying, nostalgia, surge. Suddenly the diner exploded in color. Old songs, old smells. First kisses, birthday cards. Everything that ever made Brody smile and cry played at once. The room buckled. Brody screamed, "Get out of my feelings!" He reached toward the jukebox and smashed it. A wave of silence shot through the room. The collective flickered. Unauthorized breach, unexpected resistance. Recalculating, Thalara stepped forward, her hands glowing. This is his house, not yours. She blasted them with light made of memory, of hugs, of dumb jokes, of us. They screamed and vanished. We collapsed in a booth, Brody gasping, Thalara smiling faintly. Kellen curled in his lap like a judgmental cloud. The real world blinked back in. Laptop fried, phones dead. But the toaster, still humming. Brody looked at me. Zeke? Yeah? I think I almost became religion. Well, at least you didn't get monetized. His heart was almost hijacked. But he fought back, not with logic, but with love. Now, the collective is gone, or so we think. Because somewhere in the corners of static and silence, the signal still hums. You'd think after saving the world from emotional signal hijacking, we'd get a break. But no, because the toaster was humming again. Not in a melodic, hopeful way. In a rhythmic, coded, pulsing way. Morse code. We checked. It translated to, he's still transmitting. Brody blinked. I shut down the broadcast. Thalara frowned. You shut down the core injection. But the residual wave? Residual? The memory of the signal. It's still echoing. From me? No. She turned, looked down, at Kellen, who had stopped licking his paw and was now staring directly at us. For the first time, Kellen didn't blink, didn't move, just stared like it had been waiting. Brody leaned forward. Kellen? The cat blinked once and said, meow, but it sounded wrong, not like a cat, like a translation of meow, like someone mimicking feline vocalization with too much precision. The room got colder, lights flickered. The microwave tried to display Sanskrit. Kellen, Thalara said calmly, how long have you been receiving? The cat stood, slowly, too slowly, every movement calculated, every step deliberate. It walked across the room, hopped onto the coffee table, and projected a hologram. Brody and I screamed, only a little, respectfully. The hologram showed data pulses, emotional frequencies, neural spike charts, a diagram of Brody's brain during key life events. First kiss, first heartbreak. That time he stubbed his toe on the recycling bin and cried for 7 minutes. At the center of the diagram, a node, labeled Kelenos, emotive signal relay, active since age 6. Brody stared. "You've been tracking my feelings since I was 6? Kellen turned to him, tilted his head, and spoke. Only the ones that mattered. I passed out, just for a second. When I came to, Brody was pacing. Thalara was scanning the hologram with a device shaped like a wishbone. Kellen was licking his tail, casually, as if he hadn't just shattered our understanding of reality. "Why?" Brody asked. "Why you?" Kellen replied. "Yes, because you glowed." "I what?" "As a child. You glowed with grief, pure, undiluted, untranslated. So, you picked me? Number I was assigned to you?" Thalara stepped in. "He's not a cat. He's a relational emotion leak recorder." "A reller?" I asked. "Pronounced reller. They monitor species prone to emotional destabilization, store resonance, serve as early warning beacons for emotional collapse." Brody sat down. "So, he's a spy cat from some interstellar therapy agency?" "Essentially. And all those times he knocked over cups, he was flagging spikes in your emotional volatility. And the time he peed in my laundry? Unclear. Might have just been a personal decision." Kellen yawned, then stretched. "You weren't meant to get this far. Most humans suppress. You embraced. That's bad. It's loud." The hologram shifted. It showed Earth, pulsing with light, but not solar, emotional. Brody's signal had reached the oceans. Migrating birds, even tectonic plates were slightly off sync. All because his heart was now a pulse generator. "So what now?" I asked. "Do we neuter him?" "Rude," Brody mumbled. Thalara answered. "We must disarm the relay. If Kellen is still syncing with the emotional grid, he could reactivate dormant collective nodes." "Wait," Brody said. "If we shut Kellen down, won't I lose all the emotional data? Everything we went through?" Kellen stared at him. "It's already in you. So what's left?" "Only the part that doesn't want to forget." The room fell quiet. Not heavy, just full, like the kind of silence right before a song you didn't know you loved. Brody knelt, placed a hand on Kellen's head. "You've been with me through every moment I thought no one saw." Kellen blinked. "That was the assignment. But you stayed after. That was the choice." Thalara approached, held up a crystal. "This will extract the remaining signal from him. He'll be just a cat. No memory, no mission. Will he forget me?" "Yes." Brody looked down. Kellen nuzzled into his hand, purred, software, like forgiveness. "Okay," Brody whispered. "Let's do it." The crystal pulsed. Light enveloped Kellen. He blinked once, twice, and sneezed. Then jumped off the table, walked away, like he'd never spoken a word. No hologram, no signal. Just a cat, looking for tuna. Brody sat down, smiled, then cried, only a little. I sat next to him. "Hey, yeah? You glowed when you were 6? Apparently. Weird flex. Best one I've got. The signal is gone. The spy cat. Just a cat. But Brody, still glowing, still pulling, and somewhere across the stars, another RELLR is watching and whispering, he's not done yet. It started with silence, not the kind that sits in a room, the kind that sits in your chest. Brody hadn't glowed in days, not from sadness, not from joy, just still. After releasing Kellen's relay signal, it was like his heart had gone offline, like something unplugged the broadcast tower inside him. He smiled when he meant it, laughed when things were funny, but something in his eyes kept glancing at the stars, like he was waiting for something, or someone. "You okay?" I asked, handing him cereal. He looked at it. "Why do we never use bowls? Bowls are just cups without handles." "Okay." But he didn't eat. Later that day, he opened his laptop. Not to code, not to write, just to feel. He pulled up a blank terminal, typed, "Send signal equals, I still feel you." Target. Any being who understands what it's like to miss something you never had. He paused, then hit enter. Thalara walked in mid-transmission. You know they might find you again. I'm not afraid of being found. Then what are you afraid of? Brody looked up. That no one answers. At first, nothing happened. Days passed. Skies remained unchanged. No toaster hymns, no microwaves prophesying. Even Kellen ignored him, preferring the dramatic arc of a cardboard box. But Brody kept transmitting. Every morning, every night. One simple phrase. If you feel it too, send something back. And then, it happened. At exactly 3:47 a.m., the ceiling shimmered, only for a second, but long enough to make the air hum. I ran out in boxers and socks. Talara was already there. Brody sat in the center of the living room, eyes closed, hands open. The room felt like it was holding its breath. And then, the lights blinked. Every single one. In the city, at once. A ping came through the laptop. No sender, no metadata. Just 4 words. We feel you too. We stared. The screen blinked again. More words. Not all of us remember names. But we remember ache. Thank you for feeling back. Brody's breath caught. How many? He whispered. The screen responded. 12.109003. Too many. Not enough. All of us. Talara stepped closer. You opened a reverse bridge. You're not just receiving now. You're linking. To what? To every sentient soul who ever wondered, am I the only one? And then they began to send more. Images. No, not quite. Impressions. A planet made of light that trembled when someone cried. A being who grew extra arms during grief. A child that floated when it dreamed. They sent music, not sound, but feeling and frequency. Brody wept, quietly, and the tears glowed. I sat beside him. You okay? He smiled. I'm not alone. And that should have been the end. A good one. The kind that leaves you warm. But Brody, he's never satisfied with warm. He wants real. So he typed again. Can we meet? Pause. The screen pulsed. Some of us have no form. Others have too many. But one is near. Near. You will know her. You already do. We stared. Talara stepped back. Her eyes widened. Just slightly. Brody turned to her. Is it you? She shook her head. But I think. She's been waiting. A ripple spread across the room, like reality exhaled. And in the center, she appeared. She wasn't light. She wasn't shadow. She was reminder of a face you forgot, of a dream that slipped away, of a song that played once, perfectly and never again. She stepped forward, not walking, just arriving. She looked at Brody. No eyes, but he saw her anyway. No mouth, but he heard her. You spoke, and I remembered. Brody took a step. Who are you? I was the part of you that believed. Believed what? That love could be answered, even across silence. His hands trembled. Do you have a name? I was your first imaginary friend. Oh my God. And your last real hope. She smiled, and he did too. The laptop shut down. The lights dimmed. The air stilled. But inside Brody, something ignited. A pulse, a rhythm, a resonance. Not broadcasting, not leaking, just being. The signal went out, and they answered. Not with power, not with fear, but with presence. The kind that doesn't ask for proof, just connection. And next time Brody sends a signal, the whole sky might glow back. The floating spoons were only the beginning. At first, we thought the warped gravity was limited to our apartment. Plates levitated for no reason. Socks hovered like lazy ghosts above the floor. The toaster took 23 minutes to toast a single slice of bread, but only because time itself seemed to stretch and fold in the kitchen. But after Estelle performed that final ritual, offering her trust, her energy, her love, to Levi, my roommate, who she truly believed was a god, things started slipping. Not just physics, but the threads of our shared reality. The floor no longer felt like it belonged to the earth. I had to cling to the doorknob to keep from drifting upward one morning. The street outside bent like it was being painted onto rubber stretched over invisible curves. Dogs barked vertically. Children chased kites that refused to descend. And then there was the sky. That cursed, humming, pulsating sky. It no longer had a fixed position. It shifted, tilted. One moment it was above us, and the next it was pressed against the side of the building like a spilled bucket of blue. Estelle, for her part, remained disturbingly calm. "He's learning," she whispered one evening, sitting on the ceiling like it was a park bench. "He's never controlled gravity before. Give him time." "Estelle," I said, upside down on the couch, trying to sip coffee from a mug that refused to obey the concept of down. "He's not a god." "You say that," she murmured, "but he never asked for worship, only understanding." That was worse, because Levi wasn't trying to become a god. He wasn't even aware he had become something more. Or rather, he acted like he didn't. But now entire city blocks began to lean inward, buildings tipping as if drawn toward a center that no longer matched Earth's core. It didn't help that Levi had started floating in his sleep. At night, he drifted up toward the ceiling, limbs limp, hair fanned out in zero-G like some ancient messiah of space and stillness. Estelle would sit beneath him, reading from her old alien script journal, symbols I could never decipher, and humming notes that seemed to rearrange the air. I watched from the hallway, half terrified, half hypnotized. One night, I caught her tracing his shoulder blades with silver paint. "What are you doing?" I asked. "Unlocking him," she replied softly. "He was closed by centuries of doubt." "Estelle, for the last time, he's not divine. He's barely even aware. He still thinks Brussels sprouts are baby cabbages." She smiled wistfully. "Even the divine must learn." Then came the great tilt. It started at 3:03 a.m. I was mid-dream, something involving a sandwich with infinite layers, when I fell sideways off the bed, but not onto the floor, onto the wall. My lamp shattered against the ceiling. The alarm clock spun in place like it had forgotten how to tick. I crawled to the hallway, knees scraping against what should have been the vertical surface, and screamed, "Levi! Estelle!" But they weren't in his room. They weren't anywhere in the apartment. Only the growing pressure in my chest suggested where they might be. The building itself had started to lean, groaning like a tired whale. Outside, lights blinked sideways. A taxi hovered 5 feet above the road, tires spinning aimlessly. Gravity was having an existential crisis, and we were all stuck inside its therapy session. Finally, I found them. On the roof. Levi stood barefoot, shirtless, arms stretched wide like a tuning fork. Estelle stood behind him, hands on his back, eyes closed, mouth whispering phrases I couldn't hear. Above them, the stars were spiraling, no longer static. They curved in on themselves, pulled toward a single point above Levi's head. A new gravitational center, a Levi-verse. "I'm fixing it," Levi murmured when I shouted his name. "Fixing what?" "You don't understand." His voice was layered, like there were echoes in him now. It was never about balance. Gravity's not about pulling things down. It's about bringing things closer. And that's when I felt it. My chest compressing, my memories blurring, like every atom of me was being pulled not by mass, but by meaning. Levi wasn't just controlling gravity anymore. He was reassigning emotional weight. Grief hovered heavier than lead. Love made you rise like a balloon. I looked at Estelle. Her feet were no longer touching the roof. She was floating and smiling. Over the next 72 hours, the world adjusted. Or rather, Levi adjusted the world. Mountains flattened. Oceans floated in midair, suspended like blue curtains. Lovers found each other across continents by simply feeling their emotional pull and walking toward it. Gravity be damned. Money lost weight. Secrets gained mass. And every regret you ever had suddenly dragged behind you like a chain. People stumbled under old heartbreaks. Cities collapsed under collective guilt. Only those who loved purely could walk upright. It was poetic. It was horrifying. It was him. And Estelle, she glowed, literally. Wherever she walked, flowers turned their heads, not toward the sun, but toward her. "She gave me belief," Levi told me one night, as we sat on what used to be a rooftop but now hung sideways like an Escher painting. "And what did you give her?" I asked. He paused. "Orbit." And then came the ascension event. You know when you fall in love so hard it feels like your heart isn't yours anymore? Multiply that by everyone on Earth. Levi, fully awakened now, lifted the entire planet 4 inches off its axis. No tectonic damage, no disasters, just a gentle upward drift, and with it, humanity changed. We lost interest in war, in lies, in things that weighed us down. Estelle became a symbol. People wore silver paint on their shoulders. Children floated in dreams. Poets stopped using periods and started using ellipses. But me? I missed chairs. I missed gravity. I missed normal. I missed my friend. Levi wasn't Levi anymore. He was a concept, a god, a floating abstraction of emotion and physics. And Estelle? She smiled like she belonged among the stars now. So I packed a backpack with a single apple, a note, and a memory, and walked into the horizon. Because if gravity was now made of feelings, I had one last anchor. Love. Real, imperfect, inconvenient, human love. I walked for what felt like days, though time had unraveled in such strange ways that I couldn't be sure if it had been minutes or lifetimes. The air had thinned, not from lack of oxygen, but because the concept of up had dissolved. Birds flew in spheres. Clouds drifted in spiral staircases. I passed couples floating gently as they kissed, tethered to each other by nothing but shared feeling. And beneath my boots, the earth hummed. It wasn't just the hum of machines or the thrum of tectonic plates. It was Levi. His consciousness now wrapped around the globe like a soft net, gently tugging at emotions, rearranging attraction, repurposing mass into meaning. I saw monuments floating inches off the ground, statues honoring those who once inspired love. Some were new, others had been old, neglected, now restored not by human hands but by gravitational affection. And always, always, Estelle was in the sky. She had become more than a symbol. She was the moon now, not literally, but emotionally. The entire world revolved around her glow. People tracked her like tides. Artists painted her with star silk. Children called her the Silver Lady. But to me, she was still the girl who giggled when soda fizzed too high and once believed my ramen recipe could win intergalactic cooking contests. I missed her. Not the celestial beacon, not the goddess, but the girl who looked at Levi and saw hope. I eventually reached the gravity rift. It wasn't on any map. It didn't need to be. If you had enough questions in your heart, you'd find it. It sat in the middle of a forest that grew sideways, branches reaching toward each other like lovers whispering secrets. Animals floated between the trees like soap bubbles, and at the center, a clearing, perfectly still. Like time had taken a breath and refused to exhale, Levi stood there, alone, but not the Levi I remembered. This Levi was taller, not physically but in presence. He wore nothing royal, nothing dramatic, just a dark gray hoodie and jeans, but gravity bent differently around him. Raindrops paused midair before deciding how to fall. Dust motes spiraled lovingly around his fingertips. He didn't look surprised to see me. "Hey," he said, smiling. "You made it." "I walked." "You felt," he corrected gently. I looked around. "What is this place?" He glanced upward, the point where emotion and matter collapse into understanding. "Is that from one of Estelle's poems?" He chuckled. It's something I remembered after I forgot everything else." I sat beside him, cross-legged on the oddly firm grass. "You turned the world into a metaphor." "I had help," he said. "She saw in me something I didn't." "She gave you her heart," I said quietly, "and you made it into a center of gravity." Levi didn't deny it. "Why me?" I asked. "Why am I still here, grounded, when everyone else is levitating in love and feeling in transcendence?" His eyes turned toward mine, serious now. "Because you never stopped seeing me as human." I blinked. "You never worshipped me, never feared me, never wanted anything from me except friendship. You were the anchor. You're still the anchor." I swallowed the knot in my throat. "I'm tired of being the anchor." "I know." He raised a hand. The world paused. Every leaf froze. The wind held its breath. Sound died. Only the warmth in Levi's eyes remained. He touched my shoulder. And then I fell upward. It was terrifying. Not because I was rising, but because I didn't know what I'd become without the weight of my doubts. Memories spilled from me. Times I lied, cheated, hurt people I loved. All of it dissolved into stardust, pulled from my skin like toxins. Then came the lighter things: laughter with Estelle, road trips with Levi, nights spent arguing about whether gravity existed before feelings. I was floating, and yet still me. When I opened my eyes, Estelle was there, hovering in the shimmer of twilight. Her hair glowed like silver threads in a magnetic field. Her skin shimmered with gravity dust, but her eyes were still hers. "I missed you," she said. "You've become myth," I whispered. She shrugged. "Even myths need snacks and hugs sometimes." We hovered together in the rift, suspended in something between physics and forgiveness. "I thought you'd forgotten me," I said. "I never forgot," she whispered, drifting closer. "I just couldn't go back." "Why not?" "Because love changed the laws, and going back meant pretending it didn't." We didn't kiss, not yet. Instead, we floated in silence, hearts pulled by something older than gravity, older than gods: choice. She reached into her chest, don't ask me how, and pulled out a single glowing thread. "This is yours," she said. "What is it?" "The version of me you held on to." I took it, and as soon as I did, the earth trembled. Later, Levi explained what had happened. "You grounded the divine." "Huh?" "You reminded us that love isn't about lifting each other into the sky. It's about returning." "Returning to what?" "To where we met. To who we were before the stars got in the way." He turned toward the rift. "I'm letting it go," he said. "The power?" He nodded. "It was never mine to keep, just mine to learn from." And with that, gravity returned. Slowly, kindly, like a mother's hand easing a child into sleep. People woke up on rooftops, on floating sofas, on meadows they never walked into. The ocean settled. The mountains remembered how to stand. And I finally stood still. Estelle came back with me, not as a goddess, not as a moon, but as the girl who once read love poems on post-it notes and spilled tea on sacred scrolls. We got an apartment again. Levi moved out, said he wanted to live somewhere with a basement. "Good for humility," he joked. Our spoons no longer floated. But sometimes, just sometimes, when Estelle laughs too hard, my coffee cup tilts upward like it remembers. And that's enough. 6 months after the gravity reset, life returned to something resembling normal. Birds stayed where birds should be. Elevators worked without vertical guilt. Soup no longer floated away mid-slurp. The world sighed quietly as if grateful to feel heavy again. But it wasn't the same world. People had changed. We all remembered what it was like to be weightless, not just in body, but in heart. For many, the event became legend. Scientists called it the Levi phenomenon. Religions scrambled to interpret it. Conspiracy forums exploded with diagrams, blurry footage of floating cows, and earnest declarations that the moon winked during the event. It didn't, I checked. But for those of us who knew the truth, it was never about divinity. It was about choice, about how one girl's faith in something greater turned a couch-surfing roommate into a force that reprogrammed physics, and how that same girl chose, in the end, to come back down to earth. We lived quietly after that. Estelle taught poetry at a community center. She never used her glow anymore, though sometimes when she read Neruda, the lights flickered in rhythm with her heartbeat. I started a podcast, Gravity and Other Love Stories, mostly interviews with people who'd been affected. A man in Tokyo who levitated for 3 days and ended up proposing midair. A dancer in Buenos Aires who invented a new style based on emotional lift. A retired physicist in Prague who wrote a thesis titled Mass, Memory, and the Girl Who Glowed. And Levi? He vanished for a while, said he needed to decompress emotionally, which I think meant hiking with no Wi-Fi and maybe hugging a few trees until they forgave him. But one day, he sent me a postcard, just 2 words, "Still falling." It was a Tuesday afternoon when I finally asked her. Estelle sat at our little kitchen table, absent-mindedly swirling her tea. Outside, the clouds behaved. The sun stayed politely in place. I took a breath. Did you really believe he was a god? She didn't flinch. She didn't laugh. She just looked at me with those silver-threaded eyes. No, she said, not in the way people think. Then why give him your trust? Your love? Your everything? She placed her hand gently on mine. Because even if he wasn't a god, he made me feel like I was more than just human. I swallowed. And now? She smiled. Now I know. I always was. I don't know when it started happening again. The subtle anomalies, the gravity glitches, a pencil that hovered half a second too long, a cat who refused to touch the floor, a toddler in a park whose laughter made butterflies float sideways. But this time, it wasn't Levi. It was spreading. People were remembering, not with fear, with longing. Because once you've flown, once you've felt your emotions rewire reality, you can never quite walk the same again. I visited him once more, Levi, deep in the woods. He had built a cabin, chopped wood, grown tomatoes, had a beard now, looked like a guy who spent equal time solving quantum equations and rescuing injured raccoons. You feel it too? I asked, handing him the last cup of that old stardust-infused tea Estelle used to brew. He nodded. It's not me anymore. I know. He sipped, staring out into the trees. It was never supposed to stay locked inside one person, he said. That much power, it needs to ripple. You okay with that? He chuckled. Dude, I got a tomato to float yesterday. I think I'm doing great. We laughed, and for the first time in a long time, it didn't echo with weight. That night, Estelle and I sat on our apartment roof. Old habit. The stars looked a little brighter, or maybe I just noticed them more. I have a theory, I said. Oh? Maybe gravity isn't just about mass. Maybe it's about meaning. The more something matters to you, the harder it is to let go. She leaned her head on my shoulder. Then what does it mean that I can't stop floating near you? I smiled. Means I matter, and so do you. And maybe that's enough. 1 year later, gravity update number 1. Emotional drafting detected worldwide. 2 people in love hovered 6 feet during their wedding vows. Sadness now confirmed to affect elevator descent speed. New Olympic sport proposed. Emotional altitude sprinting. Cats remain unaffected or uninterested. Epilogue. You're probably wondering, how much of this is true? The answer is simple. Every part that made your heart rise. Because gravity, after all, is just another word for longing. And love. Love is what happens when we stop resisting the pull. If you had the power to change gravity with your feelings, who would you float toward first? Let us know in the comments. And if you've ever loved someone who made your world shift, maybe send them this story. Because sometimes the people we orbit around have no idea they become our center of gravity. And if you're still falling, don't worry. So are we. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and tune in next week for our next cosmic love story. My alien girlfriend mixed stardust in my juice. Now I glow every time I lie.